Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We have found ourselves here at Wrap Up for our fiscal year 2023 through 2032 capital improvement plan. This is the final work session that we will have before we vote on adopting a CIP as well as approving the proposed bond referenda for 2022, i.e. this November on Tuesday. So today we are here to do a couple of things. We're going to take a look first. Staff has drafted the proposed language for the referenda, which again we will need to formally vote on Tuesday. And so this is an opportunity for us to review it publicly for the first time, ask questions if we have them. We do not need to wordsmith it today, although if there are broad changes in direction, this would be the right place to surface any such concerns. Once we've done that, I'm going to move us to sort of the work of the board, talking, I'll show briefly our markup, which is to say a few items of recommendation about moving funds around among the different years or adding new funds. And then I am going to raise some of the topics for accompanying guidance on capital priorities. Again, we'll not be wordsmithing or reviewing specific language, but it will be an opportunity for board members to speak to items they may be working on or have been working on to get those into the public sphere and to share it with colleagues before Tuesday's final vote. So unless there are any questions, Mr. Manager, would you like to introduce the team to show us the referendum language?
Yeah, so we're going to start up. I'm going to ask Jason Freese to walk through the proposed referendum questions and the total amounts, and then we can get into some of the other conversation you had talked about. And Jason will have some perspective on how we arrive at the wording and a little bit of history, I think, but it shouldn't take more than a few minutes. So I'll turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Mark. Again, Jason Freese, Department of Management and Finance. I'm going to walk through this year. There's 6 referenda questions on the ballot this November 8th. So I'm going to talk through each of those. You have already heard all the different various projects that are within these referenda. And as background, when we issue general obligation bonds, as a county in Virginia, we need to go to the voters and get their approval before we can go and issue those bonds in the future. So these requests that we're putting forward are just to get the authority. We will come back at a later date or multiple dates to actually issue the debt at a future time. So first thing I wanted to show you is the total requests that we are asking for this year. And I've shown it kind of by the different entities. So general government, and these questions are mostly the same that you typically see on the ballot each year. There are 2 that are fairly new. Stormwater, which you saw 2 years ago for the first time. This will be their second request. And then utilities. They are an infrequent issuer. Last time they had a referenda was in 2008 with the original upgrades to the water pollution control plan. So it's been a while, but there are some new upgrades planned. So they do have a new referenda on the ballot. So as you see, for general government, we have 3 questions. These are the same general questions you see almost every year. Parks and Recreation for $22.5 million. Community infrastructure, more general government facilities, maintenance capital for $52.3, and then a combination of Metro and our transportation program for $52.6 million, really heavily weighted towards those Metro contributions to their capital program. So for the total general government, just over $127 million. And then you have Arlington Schools. They adopted their CIP on June 23rd, I believe. And their request, which is primarily for the Career Center renovation and some other projects, is $165 million. That's not over 2 years. It's over, I think, 4 or 5 years for that project, but it's $165 million. And then we have below, you have the 2 separate funds, which are the Stormwater Fund. They're looking for another $40 million for some stormwater upgrades. And then you have utilities, and as I mentioned, those are some upgrades to the water pollution control plant primarily. It has $177 million, again, issued over more than 2 years, over multiple fiscal years. So altogether, the 6 referenda that are on the ballot this November 8th total just over $509 million. And what I show on the right side of this slide is it's a 10-year average. For calendar years 20 and 21, we had those paused CIPs that were 1 year and 3 year in length, but the referenda were actually really for 1 year projects. So this is an average of every referenda cycle, which is typically 2 years, and averaging that together. And you see we're roughly in line in the county, about $25 million a year typically for parks, 46 for community infrastructure, 59 million for Metro, total of 129, and then schools about 93 million a year on average over the past decade. Stormwater utilities don't have, because they haven't issued in the past 10 years, as I mentioned, stormwater for the first time 2 years ago, and utilities has not since 2008, so I don't have any averages there for those. But it averaged about $220 million a year for county issuance. So what I want to do next is just really quickly, I'm not going to read every word on these slides, but I'm showing here on the next couple slides the actual questions and explanations that will be on the ballot. So the question will be on the ballot. On the information we provide to the voters, we provide both a question and a brief explanation. And I say brief because we are required to be brief and put in very simple terms what is on the referenda. We can't be too detailed. We can't use terms that are specific to like an economist or somebody else. It has to be something that the general public can understand. And the question too has to be very simple and to the point. So these have not changed much over the past decade. We keep them fairly consistent. So I'll go ahead and just read. So Parks and Recreation, the 22 million, you see it's, and this is consistent among most of them, how we word it, but the question will be, shall Arlington County contract a debt and issue its general obligation bonds in the maximum principal amount of 22.46 million to finance together with other available funds the cost of various capital projects for Parks and Recreation? And then below is the explanation, as I mentioned, which this really recites the general projects that are in the CIP that this is financing, starting from the largest to some of the smaller. And for the most part, anything over 10% of the issuance, we note out as more of a specific project, and then smaller ones get lumped together as other projects. So community infrastructure, the same general type of question, and this is the $52.3 million for this one. You see it's for things such as the Neighborhoods Program, formerly neighborhood conservation, and then some of the other maintenance capital, courthouse complex renovations, facilities design and construction, and some other projects. Next, we have Metro and Transportation, which funds, as I mentioned, WMATA and some other transportation projects. As you see, 43 million of the 53 million is for Metro over 2 years or 2 years of annual contributions, and then some for transportation projects locally. On the next slide, we have the schools request for the $165 million. And then you see below the projects that it's financing. Now, the language here is something that we have some control over, but to remind the board, we cannot change the amount that the school board requests. When they make the request and adopt their CIP, we can either accept it or we can reject it. That's the only option that the county board has with accepting their request. And then you have here the stormwater referendum. As I mentioned, this is a second. 2 years ago, they came at the very first county request for bonds, and that was approved. And they have been issuing that. They'll continue to issue this year, but they do have other projects that they need to finance, and so this finances that second tranche of projects for stormwater. And the next is the utilities referendum for just over 177 million. And as I mentioned, this is primarily for the upgrades to the water pollution control plant and then some other smaller water and sewer upgrades throughout the county. Oh, the next slide is actually missing.
Mystery.
It's supposed to be a schedule. 1 second. I don't have it here on this presentation, but I'll go ahead and verbally talk you through. So the next thing I was going to talk to you all about is what happens from now. So we've had a proposed CIP that will hopefully be adopted next week at your board meeting. And with that will be the bond questions and resolutions, questions and explanations, as well as bond resolutions that will be approved by you, authorizing the referendum in the fall on November 8th. So the first step was for APS to have their bonds approved. They adopted their CIP on June 23rd. That comes to us and it gets incorporated into our CIP and a referenda request. So on July 19th, that will all be considered by the county board. After that, we need to file that request with the circuit court, and it has to be done more than 81 days before the November 8th election. So it has to be done no later than August 19th. From there, we have to publish a notice of election, and that has to be done at most 10 days before the election. So we'll probably do that somewhere in the October timeframe. From there, obviously the election day on November 8th, voters will consider these 6 questions that'll be on the ballot, just the question, not the explanation. They will have handouts and other items available at the locations with the explanations, but just the question will be on your voting machine or on the paper that you fill out. From there, should all 6 be accepted, then we will take the results, we file them with the court, And once those are filed, we have to wait a 30-day period by law and, to make sure they're not contested. And as long as they are not contested, then the bonds will go into effect and we can issue against that referenda authority. So that in a nutshell is the process. Those are the questions, the amounts, and that's really all I wanted to discuss now. We'll open it up to the board for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fries. Appreciate your work. And thank you, too, for reminding us of that distinction between the questions that appear on the ballot, which are limited to some extent by the space on the ballot, and the accompanying information, which is available for voters as consideration as well, which offers considerably more detail, as has been indicated by your slides. This would be an opportunity for questions if colleagues have any about the bond referenda language. Mr. DeFranti?
Bond referenda language. So one question is on this slide. I hope that's okay. It is the phrase of the CIP to some extent has been pent-up demand, and so I wonder if maybe the manager or Ms. Cowan, either of you could provide a little context. We are right at sort of the average of where we've been in terms of the 10-year, and yet, you know, I think we have had a lot of pent-up demand, and I wondered if you might describe sort of why, even with the pent-up demand, we managed to stay right at that average, which I'm not big on it. You know, I want to be fiscally smart. I also feel, I'm thinking back to second or third semester economics decades ago, and when you do investment, it pays off big time longer term. And so I don't know if you can speak at all to that. It may take time with planning for us to be ready to do investment. I don't want to go high unnecessarily, but I also feel like there are medium to long-term benefits of capital investment.
So I think that if we harken back to the initial presentation we made when we introduced the manager's proposed CIP, that a couple of really generational investments that we've made in the county that have impacted our debt capacity. And one is the acceleration of the Career Center. You see that when you look at the comparison of not acceleration of the Career Center, the investment in the Career Center, I should say. When you look at that 10-year average for schools being at $93 million and now being at $65 for the first 6 years of their CIP. So that's a really big investment. And then, of course, our $150 million investment in Barcroft, which does not show here on these referenda numbers. And so that those really important investments caused us, for our near-term referenda capacity, to be, you know, a little bit more limited given the size of those investments. We also have been cautious, you know, given where the inflation situation is, where the interest rate situation is, just wanting to be mindful of that. I think that we're hopeful that 2 years from now, when we come back to see you again for the next CIP, that we'll have a better sense of where that all levels out, and then we will always then revisit, you know, these numbers then. But that's really I'm actually super excited that we're able to do this level of investment, including those other two things, you know, and I feel like we're doing the right fiscally prudent thing by not going all the way, if you will.
Great. It's an advertisement for fiscal prudence. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, and an old subject, just asking for a reminder, as much for people who might be listening as for me, the nature centers. People are concerned about, and I remember there's an issue that we need to be doing more planning and things, so they're not specifically called out here. Could you remind me what we are, how we're planning to sort of do some thinking about them? And I know they involve quite a bit being, you know, because of where they are.
We have planning money in the facilities planning section of the CIP. It's later in the CIP, I would note that. And because of that, and that's not typically always bond referenda, that's typically PAYGO, given the nature of those studies, it wouldn't show up on a referenda question necessarily. So I think our plan is to look at that work later in the 10-year cycle at the nature centers and what could come next.
Thank you. I'm sure people will be talking about it in there. You know, JFAC brought it up as well.
Yep.
But just to let people know, it hasn't totally dropped off our radar scarp yet.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Karantonis?
Yeah. Just a clarification. So what exactly is what are we going to do? What are we advertising before election date, 10 days before election date?
It's just the notice of election. It's almost similar to how you have to advertise board meetings and other, we have to actually advertise a notice of election with what we do is we provide I believe it's the Washington Times, same place you post county board
see.
meetings and other publicly noticed meetings. We provide both the question and explanation of all 6 questions will go in that public notice and go out to the public.
And this is consistent with the fact that people will be voting already, with early voting being.
It's more of a legal requirement that we have to at least publish it. Like I said, we'll probably do it in like the October timeframe, maybe a month or a month and a half before. But what we do is we will also, in terms of like communication, what we put out, within a week or so, we'll actually put on the county DMF website a week or so after adopted, so next week, we'll put on the county's website the questions and explanations in English. We'll also immediately start putting together, we'll have it in 4 languages, just like we did last year. So we'll have those 4 languages available, and once those translations are complete, we'll also try to get those on the website. And then the registrar will also have the information available for voters early too. So when the voters do initially vote, they will have the information as well. The public notice piece is more of just a legality. We have to publish that. I don't know how many people still read the advertisements in the Washington Times, but so we make sure we get it in places that people can actually access it and make sure they have the information before they go out and vote.
Yeah, the background of my question was to make sure that we, have the information about the referenda
Yes.
as timely as possible, because, this is a significant money, and especially when we look at the investment stormwater and utilities, which is absolutely, they're new. People don't remember the last time that they had to vote something like that. So it's a good thing to make them, to remind them of that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Karantonis, and appreciated that opportunity for Mr. Fries to note that the legal advertisement is the absolute floor of our engagement, reaching out a number of different ways, and particularly appreciate the effort to translate these descriptions. Okay, unless there are any other questions, I'm going to again thank our DMF team, which has been doing spectacular work to keep us, to keep tracking all of these different conversations and preparing referenda language that reflects some of these ongoing dialogues. We'll move now into a sort of markup, which of course looks a little bit different than it might for our operating budget conversation. I've asked our clerk to be prepared to share with us. It's a Word doc rather than the traditional Excel sheet of the operating budget, since it's a little bit of 3-dimensional chess, given the budgets across different years. And so I am going to just begin by confirming right now the plans that I know of that colleagues have to amend the manager's proposed CIP in terms of the size of the investments themselves, with a particular focus on the ones that would impact the bonds. Upcoming in November. I should note staff is aware of the ones I'm about to list, and so the implications for the bonds have been factored into everything that Mr. Fries just presented. But let me run through these briefly. We can have an opportunity for questions and confirmation that these are the areas that, again, we are kind of formally planning to amend the manager's proposed CIP, and then we can have some conversation about accompanying guidance for capital priorities. So the first is a proposal to move $1.785 million from the 2024 referenda to this year's referenda for Gateway Park. This is specifically going to affect, as you might imagine from the title, the Parks referendum question, and increasing that question or amount accordingly. This is about accelerating the planning of the first phase of Gateway Park to fiscal 2024. This is a massive project with a lot of moving pieces and a lot of players, but it is one that I think we are interested in moving up because there is a lot of urgency from not only stakeholders in Roslyn, but I think from all of us who are excited about the potential benefits that this project could offer to the Roslyn community as it continues to grow and transform, and really as a gateway to all of Arlington County. I am at least optimistic that this can be a great model of public-private partnership, and I believe that advancing the planning is going to give a vision for the private sphere to coalesce with us, or around which the private sphere can coalesce with us in planning for the financing, ultimately, of the construction of a new Gateway Park. We have discussed this before. I think I mentioned it right before the public hearing on the CIP, but the Kenmore Fields turf conversion has been an area of close collaboration with Arlington Public Schools, as well as with the Arlington Sports Foundation, the opportunity to move forward conversion funds, $9.84 million, from fiscal 2030 in the manager's proposal to fiscal 2025. It will not impact the proposed 2022 referenda, but it does change where that money shakes out in not only our CIP, but also APS's. This is number 3 at the request of a couple of my colleagues whom I know have been very interested in trying to increase the allocation to the Arlington Neighborhoods Program, specifically increasing by $1 million in fiscal 2024. That impacts the community infrastructure referendum question by a commensurate amount, and will increase the program's allocation in the first 2 years of the CIP, because again, we tend to think about that one in 2-year cycles, as with others. Finally, to just note that the proposal here is to amend or to adapt the manager's proposed CIP to be in close alignment with APS's adopted CIP. One of their major changes was the addition of $15 million for the Career Center campus in the out years, the final years, fiscal 2027 and 28. And that reflects ongoing planning, I believe, to move the Arlington Montessori School into the center of the campus, or the erstwhile current state of the Career Center building. I bring this up just to note our staffs as well as board members, particularly the chair and vice chair, have been in very close contact with APS and the school board in particular about their proposed CIP. We're really aware of their plans to invest at different points along that 10-year continuum, and it's really important to us to stay aligned. So let me pause there. Those are the proposed amendments. Again, this would be separate from any kind of policy guidance or priority statements we may want to make accompanying the adoption of the CIP, which we'll turn to next. But colleagues, have I missed anything, or are there any questions about these proposed amendments that we would be taking up in a formal vote on Tuesday?
I don't need to manufacture questions. I just want to clarify a little bit, just to understand. So I think that probably on our slide deck, slide 4 of what we did, we probably need to just tick that up for the neighborhoods program. I think that was sort of last minute. But
If I could, the slides that we put were previous to any of these changes. So if you actually go through all the
I'm sorry, I
slides.
said the wrong
Right,
thing.
yeah. So
I thought
I
we
should
included
have, I should have noted that. This is what we were reflecting, because we didn't want to assume that you were going to make these changes.
got it.
You did clarify.
And then I believe there was some shifts in how we address some of the street work going on with respect to one of the 2 South 12th Street pieces. And I don't know if that need is already reflected, or if that is at a level that is too detailed for us to note. I feel like it's simultaneously shift in how we're approaching it, but I also do want to at least surface it.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Mr. DeFranti, and we're going to talk about the substance of that proposal, because it is in accompanying guidance. We are not actually moving where the $2.7 million for that project is. Right now it is allocated, I believe, to the Columbia Pike Bike Boulevards program, and it will stay allocated to the Columbia Pike Bike Boulevards program. Glad you asked. Hold the thought. It's a good one for discussion about guidance.
And then I think one more to clarify, I think that there's guidance that we are seeking with respect to our programmatic work with respect to historical issues, but there's also a little bit of money, and that is not a bond issue, so that's why it's not in these 4. Is that correct? Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. Any other questions on amendments to the CIP? Okay. Seeing none, moving into topics for accompanying guidance on capital priorities. This is, as our custom in operating budget as well, an opportunity for us to sort of surface things that we're working on or that we're intending to include in guidance, but the actual language of guidance will come on Tuesday at the time of adoption. To begin, and I can advance some of these or mention some of these myself, and may turn to colleagues to speak to ones that are important to each of you. To begin with the Roslyn Boathouse, We want to be clear, this is a project we are very excited about. I think it's an opportunity for us to emphasize and formalize our expectation of, as the county board, that advancing the project on the timeline in the CIP assumes and is in fact dependent on funding partnerships with private and other governmental partners. So that is a project that has been envisioned with the county bearing about 40% of the cost share, and other partners coming in for the balance. And so I think it's important for us to be on the record in our guidance. With regard to pickleball, one of the marquee emerging uses, and particularly with regard to pickleball at Walter Reed Courts, we know, we've certainly heard in public comment on the CIP that this is an area of strong interest. We, I think, are interested in giving some guidance about our expectations about when the project will not only kick off, but when it will be completed, because we know that the desire is great to expedite that. We certainly expect the project to kick off really in a matter of months, but also being really clear about what some of the trade-offs are, how fulsome the community engagement is on the one hand, and then how quickly the project can be delivered on the other. So I think guidance is a good opportunity for us to capture some of our conversations accordingly. Mr. DeFerranti talked about the 12th Street South Complete Streets connection. I can mention this one. We have been in ongoing conversation with our county staff who've been working really hard to consider options for a project that could potentially improve multimodal, including auto connectivity of the grid at 12th Street while maintaining safety for all users. Given the pressing number of additional improvements needed in Columbia Pike to deliver on not only the Pike Neighborhoods Plan, the Columbia Pike Boulevards project, but indeed Vision Zero, it is I believe we are prepared collectively to give guidance that directs that the 12th Street South Complete Street project should be deferred indefinitely, and the $2.7 million allotted to it should go instead to the other projects in the Columbia Pike Bike Boulevards program, which is to say those multimodal, largely neighborhood-based projects. With regard to the Army-Navy Country Club, this is, again, another big, long time in coming project. We've had quite a bit of conversation about option one versus option two. In the meantime, our staff has been able to do some, I think, really excellent analysis about a hybrid option, one that might deliver on some of the benefits envisioned by or advocated for by members of the community, while still addressing some of the underlying safety concerns with a steep slope version. We want to make sure that that project continues. In order to achieve that hybrid option, we do anticipate that additional funds will be needed above the $5 million currently programmed in the manager's adopted CIP. And so we are going to, we'll be working on some guidance that would allow us to explore the deferral of another project to identify up to $1.5 million for this project. And we will propose, or I will propose anyway with the guidance that we direct staff to investigate state and federal grant funding opportunities, particularly the new Reconnecting Communities federal program. With regard to bus stop accessibility, Mr. DeFerranti, would you like to talk to this one, or I'm happy to do it if not.
I'll just speak briefly to it. I think this is one where we heard community input, and some of the, we want to fashion guidance that accelerates our investments. Some of this is related to easements that we have to obtain. So it is not, at least as I understand from the manager and Ms. Khan and the deputy county manager, it is not primarily about funding. The funding, we have an easement challenge, and so we're going to put some guidance that seeks to advance this efforts as quickly as we can. I don't know if I've described it or if you would add anything to that.
As of right now, we're about halfway through. I think it's about 1,000 bus stops, and I think what the guidance is going to reflect is that if we are at a point where we run out of money because we have miraculously gotten all the easements that we've been working on for years show up all at once, we will figure out how to make sure we move ahead with it. But the real limiting factor tends to be the conversations with property owners.
Thank you. And we all, there's additional questions about how we can obtain those easements most quickly. It's not a simple problem. And I think as a board and as county leadership, we hear that we need to reflect our values in it, and we are working on it. There'll be some guidance along those lines. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. DeFerenti. And perhaps our including our formal intent in the guidance might let any property owners know that if they're willing to grant an easement, we are prepared as county government to move with alacrity to seize the opportunity. Okay, Ms. Garvey, let me turn it to you. I know you've been working on some ideas about neighborhood improvements in Arlington View and Arlington View Park in particular.
Sure. Thank you, and I appreciate the support on this. As you all know, I've had some discussions with the president of the Civic Association there, who came to me with not only a list, but a map showing all of the needs in that Civic Association. It's pretty clear, how it is all cut off from the rest of the county, that systemic racism has played a major role in many of the problems that they have today. And I found this a couple of years ago. We were looking at something, and I realized we're trying to tell them, this is kind of difficult to do and expensive, we can't do it, but of course, the government made it that way, so, it just didn't feel fair. So I've been in discussion with folks about, with also the neighborhood, we're calling it RNAC now, I think is what we're calling it, neighborhood program. And they are working on equity, and happily, in a way, the Arlington View update of their neighborhood plan is happening now. So I had thought that it might make sense to put more money in for the, and there actually is more money in, which is great, because I think as RNAC starts to look at their new sort of standards for equity, which they're kind of designing now, that Arlington View will probably come to the top. And I want to just make sure that there are funds there to help redress some of the inequities that have been there for a long time. However, that's going to take some time. We want to do it in a good sort of way, not just kind of rush through and make assumptions. Meanwhile, I know our staff has been taking a look. Many of the issues are transportation focused, and so our transportation department is working on a number of those issues with the community there, and I'm pleased about that, and planning to move forward with some of their requests. And then there is a little pocket park that doesn't look like a pocket park because it's just like there's nothing there. And I know there are some funds that the staff has assured me they're going to be probably working on, so we can kind of get that spruced up and sort of get a start on things. So I'm pleased with where things. I'm not putting in more money right now with the CIP, but absolutely have it on my view. I think I've kind of decided, appointed myself the liaison to the Arlington View community, if that's all right with my colleagues, and plan to continue to follow up. But I'm pleased at some steps that seem to be moving forward, and happy about that. And we'll hopefully move it forward more quickly than it might be if we actually just put more money in the CIP for it.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Garvey. I'm going to stay with you, actually, because I know you've also been looking at the adult day program capacity for developmentally disabled adults.
Yes, thank you. And as you'll remember, we've put some money in the budget for a pilot program. There's really a terrible unmet need for a day program for the developmentally disabled community here in Arlington. That is a growing community. It's been really hard, and particularly during the pandemic. And we've had issues with transportation because there are programs outside of Arlington, and we need more programs in Arlington. So we put in some money for a pilot, and that is getting pulled together and may actually be up and running by the end of this calendar year, which would be great. And then I wanted to make sure that that's not going to be enough, and make sure that in the future we've got some ways to expand. But I understand that also we're going to be doing planning, and I think we'll put that in some maybe specific direction to staff to do some planning so that when we get to the next CIP, the planning's been done and we'll ask for to be able to get some of those programs up and running in an expanded way as expeditiously as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, I know this is a recurring topic, so I don't know, and I know it's actually one very much under discussion with our staff. So Mr. DeFerenti and Mr. Karantonis, if you'd like to speak to it, I think even in general terms, that would be great. If you need a little more time, because I know this is a live conversation. I don't mean to put you too much on the spot right now either.
I'll just be really brief and say that we've been working on this, and I think it's sort of consistent with the CIP as a whole, in that once we show our math and do the work, I think people will find this an additional piece that's important. It's already work that, frankly, I believe is being done, but it's just sort of sharing guidance policy to help us continue to move along those lines in a reasonable way. So that's, I don't know if I wanted to be brief, and Mr. Karantonis or Madam Chair, if you have.
No, nothing significant on top of that. Just this is a continuation of our effort to reflect in our CIP our commitment to reduce carbon housing emissions and to show that we as a government really try hard to do exactly what we ask also other applicants to do, so also the private sector to deliver. So this is the full electrification of buildings, and the point here is to establish a modus operandi where the electric appliances, the electrification of the building is the default mode of proposal, and if it's not possible, then opt for different technical solutions. I think that right now both the market and the general environment allow us to seriously pursue this way, and I believe that we will be better served if we can do so. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, have I missed any items? I don't think we're formally doing guidance, but I think, Ms. Garvey, you wanted to speak to some of that kind of historical improvement opportunities.
I did. I was going to just ask about it, because I think we've all been, we've all met with members of the community who are concerned about historic preservation. And there's a lot. I mean, you've got the Black Heritage Museum that needs a permanent location. You've got the Arlington Historical Society that's got the Hume School that needs work, and all of that takes money. And they've been coming to us in the thought that, perhaps this could be part of the CIP. And I understand we have a historic, from the last budget, in our most recent budget, we've got a historic preservation grant program. And I think staff is sort of willing and able to probably put some more money in that. And that program will have some set criteria for applying for the funds. So perhaps we'll give some direction when we get there, but that's not really CIP. It is different, but I want to make sure that people who've come and talked to us know we haven't forgotten. And we are looking at it. We're just going to be doing it a different way. And it will be, we're not going to earmark this goes to this goes to that, but actually have a set way of programs to apply and make sure that we get the right priority order for the spending.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the ongoing conversation I know you and others have had with our historic preservation program, and for their good suggestions about how we can do that in a way that reflects our values of equity, but also reflects the value we collectively place.
Right,
on
and we do have our historic resources master plan coming out, and I think when we do that, that may really change how we handle things, because I think a lot of our volunteer organizations are just taking on incredible burdens for volunteer organizations, and we probably need to relook at how we do that, and I'm looking forward to having that discussion over the next year. So, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Have I missed any items, either for guidance or for commentary at this point? Okay. Well, as referenced, these will be the items that we spend the next couple of days refining, the specific guidance, the specific language. And unless colleagues or our Department of Management and Finance or departments have anything else to bring forward at this time, we will go ahead and conclude our wrap-up session and look forward to concluding the CIP for 2023 through 32 with a formal vote on Tuesday evening. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned.